Thank you very much, Wendy. Good morning, good morning, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first presentation of the day. We're going to talk about stairs and handrails under the Florida Building Code accessibility. All right. First thing out of the gate is to show you your AIA approval number for health, safety, and welfare credits. This is a 1-hour presentation. My name is John Farinelli, and I will be your instructor for this course this morning. Let's take a look at the course objectives. Out of the gate, locate the stair and handrail provisions of the Florida Building Code accessibility volume. Understand the technical provisions governing accessible stairs and handrails. Understand the provisions during the design phase. And understand the provisions as applicable during the plan review and field inspection phases. Now, of course, first thing to tell everybody is just because you put the international symbol of accessibility on something doesn't make it so. And sad to say, you can't make stuff like this up. Somebody actually did that. Absolutely amazing. All right, let's go ahead and get into the code, folks. Now, Chapter 5 of the Accessibility Code volume addresses all general site and building elements. Stairs, both interior and exterior, are specifically addressed in Section 504. The General Charging Provisions section, also known as a charging section, references stairs to Section 504. Treads and risers are addressed in Section 504.2. All steps on a flight of stairs shall have uniform riser heights and uniform tread depths. Risers shall be 4 inches high minimum and 7 inches high maximum. Treads shall be 11 inches deep minimum. And these provisions, ladies and gentlemen, are consistent with Section 1011.5.2 of the Building Code volume. And it's also consistent with the Florida Fire Prevention Code, NFPA 101, in Section 7.2.2. Now, there is one thing to point out when we look at this. Both the Building Code volume in Section 1011.5.2 and the Fire Prevention Code, Section 7.2.2, they permit a tolerance of 3/8 of an inch between the largest and smallest riser height and tread depth. Now, while the accessibility code itself doesn't talk about tolerances, there is no conflict because the accessibility code in a blanket section merely states that the accessibility provisions allow for conventional industry tolerances. So there is no issue there. Here is an excellent graphic showing the correct method of measuring riser heights and tread depths. Tread depth is always measured leading edge to leading edge, and riser height is always measured stepping surface to stepping surface. And the method of measurement is consistent for stairs with nosings and for stairs without nosings. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Now here is another pretty good graphic here. In addition to the riser and tread provisions, this graphic also depicts the continuity of the inside handrail, where it makes the turn coming up and going up to the next flight. Now, something else to notice here. In addition to the language, all steps on a flight must have uniform riser heights and uniform tread depths. Take a look at this. Open risers are prohibited. This is specifically addressed in section 504.3 of the Accessibility Code volume. And we're going to take a look at that right now. But first, before we move forward and discuss open risers, this is what I alluded to just a minute ago about construction and manufacturing tolerances. We should really take a closer look at this and how the Accessibility Code addresses it. This is section 104.1.1, construction and manufacturing tolerances. All dimensions are subject to conventional industry tolerances, except where the requirement is stated as a range with specific minimum and maximum endpoints. Here's a good shot. We have a range 33 to 36 inches, and then a hard number, 36. So, conventional industry tolerances recognized by this provision include those for field conditions and those that may be a necessary consequence of a particular manufacturing process. But recognized tolerances are none intended to apply to design work. So the bottom line is this. When the requirement states a specified range, such as in section 609.4, where grab bars must be installed between 33 and 36 inches above the floor, the range provides an adequate tolerance, and therefore no tolerance outside of the range at either endpoint is permitted. And if you can't hit it between the range, you've got bigger fish to fry. But when the requirement is a minimum or maximum dimension that does not have two specific minimum and maximum endpoints, tolerances may apply. Now, that said, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the United States Access Board. They are the board that is responsible for assuring accessibility provisions under the Americans with Disabilities Act are met in buildings that are owned or leased by the federal government. Because when we talk about dimensional tolerances, you've got to have something to hang your hat on. So here is something that you may wish to take a look at. The position of the U.S. Access Board, as formalized in the ADA/ABA guidelines in section 104.1.1, is that industry standard tolerances should be relied on when questions regarding this issue arise. And the U.S. Access Board has completed research, dimensional tolerances in construction and for surface accessibility. Because as I think everybody would agree, it's important for us in our business to be consistent in how we interpret and apply the codes. All right, let's go ahead and move forward now and go to 504.3, and let's talk about those open risers. Very, very simple, very, very short, very, very sweet. This is, again, 504.3, open risers are not permitted. Now, the code does not address when a riser could contain openings and still be considered solid. However, the intent is so that someone would not catch their toe as they moved up the stairway. It is not the intent to prohibit risers made of grills or other designs where a toe would not catch. Grill stairways are often used in exterior locations to allow for the passage of snow or rain and decrease the chance of accumulation and possible slips and falls on the stairways. Risers cannot be open, but perforations or openings in the riser surfaces that prohibit passage of a spear not more than 1/2 inch in diameter are acceptable. Now, notwithstanding the exceptions, the prohibition against open risers is consistent with Florida Building Code Building Volume, Section 1011.5.5.3, and Florida Fire Prevention Code, section 7.2.2.3.3. It's a beautiful thing when all the codes are consistent with one another, isn't it? All right. That takes care of open risers. Let's talk now about the tread surfaces under 504.4. Stair treads shall comply with 302. Changes in level are not permitted. But you do have an exception. Tread shall be permitted to have a slope not steeper than 1 in 48. And again, that's a pretty consistent number under a lot of exceptions, and that is primarily for drainage more than anything else. Now, the permitted half-inch gap in the stair treads that we previously discussed is permitted by section 302, floor and ground surfaces of the accessibility code. Specifically, section 302.3, openings, states that openings in floor or ground surfaces shall not allow passage of a spear more than 1/2 inch in diameter. Treads are not allowed to have a change in level other than that slope not steeper than 1 in 48, which we said was all about drainage on the tread surface. And again, note that the stair tread gap of 1/2 inch is consistent again with the Florida Building Code, Building Volume 1011.7.1 and Florida Fire Prevention Code 7.2.2.3.4. All right. Let me take a quick look here, see if we've got any questions coming in yet. Let's see. Looks like we do. Let me take a quick look. Here's a question here from Mr. Borcha. So are open risers only permitted under the residential code? That is pretty much the way it works there, Robert. The building code volume is very, very clear, along with the accessibility code, that in buildings of public accommodation, or even if it's not a public accommodation, you can't have open risers. Now, when it comes to the residential code, you have to remember that the accessibility code does not apply. And under the provisions of the Florida Building Code Residential Volume 8th edition, consistent with the 7th edition, you can have open risers, but only up to 30 inches above the floor. That's it. After that, it is a 4-inch spear code. All right. Very good. Thank you, sir. All right. Next up is 504.4. We need to talk now about nosings. The radius of curvature at the leading edge of the tread shall be 1/2 inch maximum. Nosings that project beyond risers shall have the underside of the leading edge curved or beveled. Risers shall be permitted to slope under the tread at an angle of 30 degrees maximum from the vertical. Permitted projection of the nosing shall extend 1.5 inches maximum over the tread below. Now, the 1/2 inch maximum radius of curvature at the leading edge of the tread is intended to allow descending foot placement on a surface that does not pitch the foot forward or allow the ball of the foot to slide off the treads, and ascending foot placement to slide onto the tread without catching on a square edge. Now, note that there is a difference between the accessibility and building code volumes regarding the permitted projection of the nosing over the tread below. The accessibility code permits a 1.5 inch extension, while the Florida Building Code building volume, section 1011.5.5.1, limits the projection to 1.25 inches. And of course, you would go with the most restrictive. Because remember, our Florida Accessibility Code is based on the 2010 Americans with Disabilities Act. So we would still go, again, most restrictive 1.25 inches. Now, I do have another graphic here to show you. Profiles of your treads and risers, they contribute to stairway safety. And the radius or bevel of the nosing eases the otherwise square edge of the tread and prevents irregular chipping and wear that can become a maintenance issue and seriously affect the safe use of the stair. Now, notice that the maximum 1/2 inch nosing radius is typical for all profiles. Angled or sloping risers, which allows the step profile to have a nosing projection without a lip that might cause a foot to catch when dragged up the face of the riser, are limited to a maximum of 30 degrees. Now, nosing projections are limited to a maximum of 1.5 inches over the tread below, regardless if the nosing is curved or beveled. But remember, the building code volume is 1.25 inches. Now, I do have a question here for the folks in attendance. Is color contrast required for stair nosings? What do y'all think? Anybody want to give me their thoughts on that? Anybody? Okay. Donna's saying no. Robert's saying yes. Osvaldo, no. Giselle, no. Let's see. Okay. Looks like the no's are going to have it because take a look at this. Visual contrast on stair nosings or leading edges of treads is helpful for people with low vision, but it is not required except at escalators and rail and fixed guideway stations, which must meet ASME A17.1, the safety code for elevators and escalators. And we'll talk a little bit more about escalators and elevators towards the end of the course. However, there's something else that we need to mention when we talk about this color contrast, and that comes out of the building code volume. Take a look at this. This is section 1011.5.4.1, non-uniform riser heights. The nosings or leading edges of treads at such non-uniform riser heights shall have a distinctive marking stripe, different from any other nosing provided on the stair flight. The distinctive marking stripe shall be visible in descent of the stair and shall have a slip-resistant surface. Marking stripe shall have a width of not less than 1 inch, but not more than 2 inches. This section of the code comes into play, ladies and gentlemen, when you have a sloping public way. And that results in the non-uniform riser heights, where you have to have that marking to warn people that the riser height is different there. So from an accessibility code standpoint, nope. Building code, yes. All right. Here is 504.6. Stairs shall have handrails complying with 505. Now let's talk a little bit about this for a moment. Handrails are very distinct from guards, even though they are sometimes incorrectly called guardrails. The handrail is the element that is grasped during vertical travel for guidance, stabilization, pulling, and as an aid in arresting a possible fall. Guards, well, they're located near the side of an elevated walking surface to minimize the possibility of a fall to a lower level. Now, note that the provisions for handrails located along walking surfaces and ramps differ from the provisions required for stairways. Handrails have 4 recognized functions in stairway use. First, they serve to guide persons in ascent and descent along the path of egress travel, which is especially important for those with low vision, and in cases of fire where vision might be obscured by smoke. Second, they provide a tool for the user to exert stabilizing forces longitudinally along the length of the rail, vertically, and most importantly, transversely or perpendicular to the rail, as the body transfers weight from side to side with each leg swing of the unique gait used on stairs. And third, they provide for pulling with arms when they are used to augment legs in the ascent of steeper angles, or when such climbing strategies result in more efficient use of the strength of the user. And fourth, they are a tool that can be utilized to help in the arrest of a fall. In these capacities, handrails serve to aid in the use of the stairway and are required on both sides of stairways in compliance with Section 1014 to allow passing users unencumbered access to a handrail. Now, once again, we've all seen what happens out in the field, and I think you would agree that there are numerous issues here from incorrect tread dimensions, a lack of required handrails, and this very, very interesting non-compliant handrail. It looks pretty cool, but nowhere near close to being code compliant. All right. Here is 504.7, wet conditions. Stair treads and landings subject to wet conditions shall be designed to prevent the accumulation of water. Well, as we discussed previously, folks, the 1 in 48 slope permitted per Accessibility Code Section 504.4 facilitates drainage and assists in preventing the accumulation of water on the stair treads. Note that while the Accessibility Code does not expressly state that a 1 in 48 slope is permitted for stair landings, Florida Building Code Building Volume, Section 1011.7.1, specifically states that a 1 in 48 slope is permitted for stair landings and stair treads. And Florida Fire Prevention Code, Section 7.2.2.3.4, also permits a 1 in 48 slope for stair landings and stair treads. So, no issue with a little bit of slope there, the 1 in 48 for the landing. Because as it is referenced under wet conditions, stair treads and landings, and you specifically get the 1 in 48 slope for the treads, no issue with applying that 1 in 48 slope to the landings. All right, so let's go back and talk about these open treads and open risers and such, okay? The 1/2 inch limitation is based on the size of a crutch or cane tip and is consistent with accessibility code requirements. Now, when you look at this photo here, it shows code compliant stair treads and risers with openings that would facilitate the draining of water that would otherwise accumulate on the stair surfaces. The opening limitation is also small enough that most shoe heels will not get stuck. Now, if you're going to use a slotted grille pattern, the slots must run side to side on the stairway tread and not nosing to back. But still can't be more than a 1/2 inch. All right. That puts us in pretty good shape here as far as completing section 504. Let's move forward now and talk about 505. Now, the scoping and technical provisions applicable to handrails are specifically addressed in this section. Here is section 505.1, the general charging section. Handrails provided along walking surfaces complying with 403, required at ramps complying with 405, and required at stairs complying with 504 shall comply with 505. Now, let me double check something here. Come on, computer, don't give me agita. Let's see. Looks like we've got another question coming in here. And Don is asking, how do people with high heels walk on these stairs with openings? Well, again, Don, at the 1/2 inch limitation, I can't honestly say that I'm too familiar with women's high heels, but generally speaking, unless they're like, what do you call those? I guess the spike heels, I guess they're called. Those could perhaps be an issue, but generally speaking, the heels aren't going to get caught because of that 1/2 inch limitation. Good question. Thank you. All right. Let's talk about this now for a second here, because this is important. You've got to differentiate between the requirements for handrails on walking surfaces, ramps, and stairs. They're all different applications. Now, walking surfaces are limited to a slope of 1 in 20. Once the walking slope exceeds 1 in 20, it becomes a ramp, which have different handrail requirements than those for walking surfaces and stairs. So let's take a little closer look at this. Handrails are required on ramp runs with a rise greater than 6 inches and on certain stairways. But handrails are not required on walking surfaces with running slopes less than 1 in 20. However, handrails are required to comply with 505 when they are provided on walking surfaces with running slopes less than 1 in 20. Sections 505.2, 505.3, and 505.10 do not apply to handrails provided on walking surfaces with running slopes less than 1 in 20, as these sections only reference requirements for ramps and stairs. So as you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, a very, very clear differentiation between the technical provisions for handrails, be they on walking surfaces, ramps, or stairs. Now, something that I always like to remind people of, and this is a very important section. No, you do not have to provide handrails on walking surfaces with running slopes less than 1 in 20. However, if you do provide them, they have to comply. They have to. And that's a basic tenet of all our codes. If you provide it, it must comply. Because if you don't, you're going to give people a false sense of security at a minimum. And at a worst case scenario, create a dangerous situation. So bottom line, not required, but if you provide it, they have to comply. All right. Let's take a look here now. 505.2, where required. Handrails shall be provided on both sides of stairs and ramps. But look at your exception. In assembly areas, handrails shall not be required on both sides of aisle ramps where a handrail is provided at either side or within the aisle width. Now, it is always important to remember that when dealing with assembly occupancies, compliance with the provisions contained in Florida Building Code Section 1029, assembly is also required. You've got two masters to serve there because assembly is treated somewhat differently. There's a lot going on when we talk about accessibility provisions for handrails, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward here. All right, next up, 505.3, continuity. Handrails shall be continuous within the full length of each stair flight or ramp run. Inside handrails on switchback or dogleg stairs and ramps shall be continuous between flights or runs. Exception. In assembly areas, handrails on ramps shall not be required to be continuous in aisles serving seating. And that's because you get the break in the handrail for a crossover between the seating on both sides of the aisle. Now, a little bit more conversation here, if you will, when it talks about handrails. Whole point here, handrails must be usable for their entire length without requiring the user to release their grasp. Typically, when using the handrail while traveling the means of egress, an individual's arm is extended to lead the body with the hand forming a loose grip on the top and sides of the rail. If handrails are to be of service to users, they must be uninterrupted and continuous. Oversized newels, changes in the guard system, or excessive supports at the bottom of small perimeter handrails can cause interruption of the handrail, requiring the occupants to release their grip. Now, the accessibility code requirements for handrail continuity, they are consistent with Florida Building Code Building Volume Section 1014.4 and Florida Fire Prevention Code Section 7.2.2.4.2. Yeah, another issue, of course, height 505.4. Top of gripping surfaces of handrails shall be 34 inches minimum and 38 inches maximum vertically above walking surfaces, stair nosings, and ramp surfaces. Handrails shall be at a consistent height above walking surfaces, stair nosings, and ramp surfaces. Now, it has been demonstrated that for safe use, the height of handrails must not be less than 34 inches nor more than 38 inches above the leading edge of the stairway, treads, landings, or other walking surfaces. And of course, that handrail height of 34 to 38 inches is consistent with the building code volume 1014.2 and the fire prevention code 7.2.2.4.5.1. But let's take a look at the differences between the handrail provisions specified for adults and those recommended for children. Because remember, the technical provisions in the accessibility code are based on an adult. And for the longest time, there was really nothing in the code that dealt with children. But when we went to the 2012 edition of our code, back when we did the 2010 ADA update, we've got some recommendations. The requirements for stair and ramp handrails in the accessibility code are for adults. Where children are the principal users in a building or facility, such as an elementary school, a second set of handrails at an appropriate height can assist them and aid in preventing accidents. A maximum height of 28 inches measured to the top of the gripping surface from the ramp surface or stair nosing is recommended for handrails designed for children. Sufficient vertical clearance between upper and lower handrails, 9 inches minimum, should be provided to help prevent entrapment. Now, here is a really, really good picture here that depicts an excellent example of a handrail installed at the 28-inch height recommended for children. Section 7.2.2.4.5.7 of the Florida Fire Prevention Code also permits additional handrails that are lower or higher than the main handrail. Now, I do have a question for you. There is a code violation, if you will, for lack of a better term, at this set of handrails for these stairs. Does anybody see it? Does anybody see it? All right. Juan's got it. Yep, the new one. Yep. Okay, folks are on it. Right here. Come back here. Right there. Extension shall return to a wall, guard, or the landing surface, or shall be continuous to the handrail of an adjacent stair. You folks are on it. And let's see, Donna's asking, can the handrail gradually increase or decrease in height from 34 to 38 in a continuous rail? And the answer is no, because it said in that previous section that we saw just a couple minutes ago that the height has to be consistent. So good question. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Come on. Here's a good shot. Handrails required on ramp runs with a rise greater than 6 inches per section 405.8 and on certain stairways per section 504. And as we said, not required on a walking surface with a running slope less than 1 in 20. Now, something to remember here too, and this is important, 505.4 clearance. Clearance between the handrail gripping surfaces and adjacent surfaces must be 1.5 inches minimum. And that, of course, is all about allowing the user to slide his or her hand along the rail with fingers in the gripping position without contacting the wall surface, which could have an abrasive texture. However, there is a difference between the Florida Building Code building and accessibility volumes in the Florida Fire Prevention Code under NFPA 101 as it relates to handrails. Both the building and accessibility code call for 1.5 inches of clearance in section 1014.7 and 505, respectively. But section 7.2.2.4.5.5 of the Florida Fire Prevention Code calls for a minimum 2.25 inches of clearance. And here is the section. New handrails shall be installed to provide a clearance of not less than 2.25 inches between the handrail and the wall to which it was fastened. So, in a building of public accommodation, falls under the scope of the Florida Fire Prevention Code, this section would take precedence, and you would have to provide that 2.25 inches of clearance because it is more restrictive. All right, so we will continue the discussion on handrails, and we'll go back here and talk about section 505.6, the gripping surface. Handrail gripping surfaces shall be continuous along their length and shall not be obstructed along their tops or sides. The bottom of handrail gripping surfaces shall not be obstructed for more than 20% of their length. Where provided, horizontal projection shall occur 1.5 inches minimum below the bottom of the handrail gripping surface. Now, this section goes on with some exceptions. 1. Where handrails are provided along walking surfaces with slopes not steeper than 1:20, the bottoms of handrail gripping surfaces shall be permitted to be obstructed along their entire length, where they are integral to crash rails or bumper guards. 2. The distance between horizontal projections and the bottom of the gripping surface shall be permitted to be reduced by 1/8 inch for each 1/2 inch of additional handrail perimeter dimension that exceeds 4 inches. Reason for number 2 being is that the larger the perimeter dimension is, you're not going to be able to get your hand all the way around the grip, and therefore there will be nothing along the bottom there to obstruct your sliding your hand along the handrail because you're not be able to get your hand all the way around the bottom. Now the cross section, 505.7, handrail gripping surfaces shall have a cross section complying with 507.7.1 or 7.2. Now 505.7.1 provides the technical specs for handrails with a circular cross section, while 505.7.2 provides the technical specifications for handrails with a non-circular cross section. So looking at 7.1, handrail gripping surfaces with a circular cross section shall have an outside diameter of 1.25 inches minimum and 2 inches maximum. Now the specs for the handrails address the diameter of the circular cross sections and required knuckle clearance. But remember, while the accessibility code permits a 1.5 inch wall clearance, the fire prevention code requires a minimum of 2.25 inches. So let's take a closer look here at how the building code volume and the fire prevention code deal with handrails. Under Florida Building Code section 1014.3.1, handrails with a circular cross section or non-circular cross section are known as type 1 handrails, which are described as having a circular cross section of 1.25 inches minimum to 2 inches maximum, or where the handrail is not circular, it shall have a perimeter dimension of not less than 4 inches and not greater than 6.25 inches, with a maximum cross-sectional dimension of 2.25 inches and a minimum cross-sectional dimension of 1 inch. Edges shall have a minimum radius of 0.01 inch. And then when you look at the fire prevention code, circular cross section with an outside diameter of not less than 1.25 inches and not more than 2 inches. So there's no difference between the building and fire code volumes. Now looking at non-circular cross sections. Handrail gripping surfaces with a non-circular cross section will have a perimeter dimension of 4 inches minimum 6¼ inches maximum, and a cross-sectional dimension of 2¼ inches maximum. So it does not matter if the cross section is circular or non-circular. Fire prevention code requirement for 2¼ inches is still applicable. And also, this non-circular cross sections, they can be of different shapes as long as the shape has rounded edges and meet perimeter and cross-sectional dimensions. Any profile meeting these criteria is permitted because that's how the code controls it. The perimeter and the cross section. So the shape doesn't matter. It's all about the perimeter and the cross section. As long as you're in compliance with those two, you're golden. All right. Now here is 505.8. Handrail gripping surfaces and any surfaces adjacent to them shall be free of sharp or abrasive elements and shall have rounded edges. So here's another question for you. Can guards or collars be attached to handrails to prevent skateboard traffic? What do you all think? Can you do that? One saying nope, nope. All right, and you guys are on it. Handrail gripping surfaces at egress stairs must be subject to the accessibility code, must be unobstructed on the top, sides, and free of sharp or abrasive elements so that a user can maintain a continuous grip along the full length. Now, I do have some questions here. Donna, maximum of 6 inches, so if someone does not get something caught in there. No, it's all about being able to wrap your hand around the handrail to be able to properly grip it. And Alexander, so if the handrail is fastened to the guardrail, does it need to be 2¼ inches? Well, again, there's different section in the code there, Alexander, about whether or not the guardrail is fastened to the handrail. And if that is the case, if it's a handrail mounted to the side of the guardrail, then yes, you would still have to have the 2¼ inches. All right. And yes, Robert, you would have to go with the dimension of 2¼ because that is the most restrictive and that is what would take precedence. All right, good stuff, folks. All right, now, next thing, 505.9, fittings. Handrails shall not rotate within their fittings. And we've all seen these. This is more of an industrial look where you have these fittings that clamp down onto the tubes. And the reason for that, obviously, is you don't want things to be able to rotate within the fittings because then people could lose their grip. It would be unsecure, and that could lead to falling down the stairs, or worse yet, falling up the stairs. Now, the next thing is handrail extensions, 505.10. Handrail gripping surfaces shall extend beyond and in the same direction of stair flights and ramp runs in accordance with 505.10. But you get some exceptions. 1, extensions shall not be required for continuous handrails at the inside turn of switchback or dogleg stairs and ramps. 2, in assembly areas, extensions shall not be required for ramp handrails in aisles serving seating where the handrails are discontinuous to provide access to seating and to permit crossovers within the aisles. 3, in alterations, full extensions of handrails shall not be required where such extensions would be hazardous due to planned configuration. Now, a question that sometimes come up is objects mounted on posts with leading edges. Well, if they're higher than 27 inches, they cannot protrude into the circulation path more than 12 inches, and that is out of section 307.3. But it's important that we look at this circulation path. Exactly what is it? Now, with handrails, this applies only to horizontal portions and not to sloping portions. Horizontal top extensions that return to the post can protrude any amount, if the leading edge is 27 inches maximum above the finished floor or ground. So that is very, very crystal clear. It only applies to the slope or to the horizontal portion, not the slope. But again, we need to look at that circulation path because it is a defined term in the code. An exterior or interior way of passage provided for pedestrian travel, including but not limited to walks, hallways, courtyards, elevators, platform lifts, ramps, stairways, and landings. It's pretty much anywhere a person travels inside or outside of the building. And there is a difference between the circulation path and the accessible means of egress, which is also defined in the code. A continuous and unobstructed way of egress travel from any point in a building or facility that provides an accessible route to an area of refuge or horizontal exit or a public way. As such, limitations on protruding objects, as addressed in Section 307 of the code, they're applicable throughout all interior and exterior portions of the building where a person may travel. So let's take a look now at the extensions, top and bottom, at ramps. Ramp handrails shall extend horizontally above the landings for 12 inches minimum beyond the top and bottom of the ramp runs. Extension shall return to a wall, guard, or landing surface, or shall be continuous to a handrail of an adjacent ramp run. Now here is a good graphic here that shows the proper configuration of handrails installed on a ramp. Right there. Notice the 34 to 38 inch handrail height and the required 12-inch extensions at the top and bottom of the ramp run. And that's exactly what it needs to look like. Now stairs are treated a little differently. At the top of a stair flight, handrails shall extend horizontally above the landing for 12 inches minimum, beginning directly above the first riser nosing. Extensions shall return to a wall, guard, or the landing surface, or shall be continuous to the handrail of an adjacent stair flight. And here's a couple of really good graphics here showing the proper configuration of the extensions at the top, 12 inches past that last riser. Could do a landing return here, return it to the wall. Either way, still 34 to 38 to the top. Fire Prevention Code in 7.2.2.4.5.9 has similar requirements for the configuration of the extensions. But at the bottom of the stairs, it's a little different. 505.10.3. At the bottom of a stair flight, handrail shall extend at the slope of the stair flight for a horizontal distance at least equal to 1 tread depth beyond the last riser nosing. Extension or return to a wall, guard, or the landing surface, or shall be continuous to the handrail of an adjacent stair flight. And here's a good shot. This graphic shows the proper extension. Continue the slope past the last riser, or excuse me, the first riser of the same dimension. If that's 12 inches, slope continues for 12 inches, measured horizontally. Now, the fire prevention code, consistent with the requirement for handrail extensions, still gives you the same 12 inches on the slope. Now, what about handrail extensions? Must they be in the same direction as the stair flight? Yeah, but continuous handrails can wrap at the inside turn of the switchback or dogleg stairs, absolutely. But alterations can present a problem. And alterations where the required extension would project into the circulation path and pose a hazard, they can turn, wrap, or be shortened as necessary. And we've all seen crazy things like this. Why they turned this one to get it out of the egress path of the sidewalk and left this one on the right, I can't explain that, but we've all seen people do crazy stuff. Now, another issue that you always have to be concerned about is maneuvering clearances at your doors. Can handrails overlap door maneuvering clearances? Well, no. Door maneuvering clearances must be free of any overlapping objects, even those providing near and toe clearance, which can interfere with maneuvering at doors and doorways. However, door maneuvering clearances can be offset up to 8 inches from the face of the door or gate to accommodate wall thickness, casework, shelves, or other elements adjacent to doorways, including the handrails. And the door maneuvering clearance must be measured from the leading edge of such elements so that the full clearance is free of any obstructions. And here's a real good graphic showing the 8 inches, just like that. Handrails and other elements cannot overlap the door maneuvering clearance, but can be located within the 8-inch maximum offset from the face of the door. So just like that. All right, well, as we approach the end of the program here, folks, I have another question for you. What about escalators? The Accessibility Code addresses escalators in rail and fixed guideway stations in Section 810.9, but not those provided in other types of facilities. Escalators must have a clear width of at least 32 inches and meet specific provisions in the ASME A17.1 Safety Code for Elevators and Escalators. The reference ASME criteria requires steps to be demarcated by yellow lines 2 inches wide, maximum along the back and sides, and specify at least 2, but not more than 4, flat steps at escalator entrances and exits. And that's why no matter where you go, when you see escalators, they're always the same. The accessibility code only addresses it in 810.9. And all it does is reference the ASME A17.1. That's pretty much it. All right, let me check, see here if we got any questions going on. Looks like that's going to be about it for the questions. I don't see anything. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to about do it. That's about all I got for you this morning. This concludes our presentation on the stair and handrail provisions of the 8th edition 2023 Florida Building Code Accessibility Volume. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and that you found the information to be useful.
Hey,
Any
John,
final thoughts?
I think there's one question that just came in from Jack.
All right, let me take a look here.
Okay.
All right, at exit stairs on discharge level with the bottom of the stairs closed off with a cane detection rail. Can the handrail dog leg to be supported by cane detection rail? Jack, that's not really a question, sir. I can answer just looking at it like this. I'd actually have to see a little bit more on that as far as maybe a detail or something. That's just way too complicated to give you an answer, yes or no, on that. Sorry about that, but I need a little bit more. All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John, and again for filling in for us.